rise for a moment of silence and each of our please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Added notice of this meeting was provided to the Cranford Chronicle as advertised on March the 6th, 2015, and promptly posted on the Municipal Public Bulletin Board and filed in the office of the Municipal Clerk, informing the public of the time, place, according to the provisions of the Open Public Meeting Law, Chapter 231, PL 1975. Please, everyone, turn off your cell phones. Roll call, Ms. Ariano.
Mayor Borough.
Here.
Councilman Martin.
Here.
Councilman Matthews.
Here.
Councilman Petrozelli.
Here.
Councilman Tarantino. Here. Councilman Fisco. Here. Council President Pearson.
Here. Thank you. The purpose of the meeting this evening is the Finance Committee will present the 2015 municipal budget. We'll have an open discussion about from the council members. Page yourself here.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to welcome Mayor, my fellow council people, and the residents to the first presentation of the 2015 municipal budget. I'd like to thank members of my committee, Councilman Tedesco, Councilman Martin, as well as our professional staff of the Borough Administrator, CFO, and auditors, for all the long hours and hard work spent on this budget at our meeting. As a council who's well aware, we are faced with a few big-ticket items this year that we must fund. One is the 16% increase in our payment to the Rolway Valley Sewerage Authority, which totals about $86,000. That alone equals an increase of about 45 on the average home. Also, due to last year's major roof issue here at Borough Hall, we needed to do a special emergency appropriation. We are required to budget the full amount in this year's budget, which equals about $37,000. Most areas of the budget stayed flat or slightly increased or decreased based on the borough's needs. We carefully reviewed each and every line, as we do every year, to ensure we are presenting the council with a tight budget to review. For instance, we would have liked to reduce buildings and grounds more than we did, but are limited as we have spent about $12,000 this year already for the heating system here at Borough Hall. There was a request by administration to increase it to $100,000, but we decided to scale this department back to $91,500 you see before you tonight. The police department has an increase of $45,000 in salaries and wages, which equals an increase of almost $25 per household. The police other expenses rose in part to rising costs, but also because we budgeted $7,500 this year for street signs. This amount was recommended by the chief in the event that the council decides to move forward with the permit parking ordinance, which has been discussed at prior meetings. Also, the pension system for the borough's public employees increased a total of $17,480, which is almost $10 per household. As you can see, we faced many increases this year, and they certainly add up quick. We did the best we could do to combat this by cutting wherever possible, but still in a responsible manner. For example, we made cuts from the large to the small in areas such as administration and executive, streets and roads, utilities, gas, contingent, and more. Important to note is that without reducing any services that residents have come to expect and deserve. In keeping with our policy of transparency, we separated the sports and recreation complex out in this budget. Right now, we are projecting $19,516 in complex-specific operational costs. However, this is very important to make note that many of these expenses already existed in the previous complex, such as electric, gas, water, cleaning services, fire protection, telephone, and pest extermination. At least half of our complex-related bills were previously paid out of other parts of the budget, like buildings and grounds. We anticipate this complex to generate revenue, as multiple organizations have already submitted applications to pay for use of the complex. Computerized data processing has been centralized into one section of the budget rather than be scattered throughout various departments. These departments have been reduced accordingly, therefore the new line is not really new at all. It is not really an increase either as it existed previously. The Finance Committee recommends an increase to LoSAP award for volunteer firefighters and EMS in line with the COLA of 1.6, which equates to about $600 total. As of tonight, the Finance Committee has a recommendation for non-union raises of 1.75% for protected workers and 1% for non-protected workers, for a total amount of $8,300. We look forward to discussing this with the rest of council to see how everyone feels about this matter. We also like to discuss the council's intention when it comes to tree maintenance. We've increased this line by $6,000, which met the recommendation of the administrator, halfway as the borough is still about a year and a half behind in tree work. We would like to know how the rest of the council would like to leave the $6,000 or reduce it back to last year's total of $18,000. We initially looked at an increase of $223 for our starting administration budget, but we continued to cut and use an appropriate amount of fund balance. In fact, the committee requested for it to be scaled back to that exact level it was left at last year in light of the upcoming bond sale and need for a fund balance in order to function as a town, and the auditors and CFO recommended no more should be used. We need all to get it where it is tonight, which is $96 on an average home assessed at $100,000. Although I don't want to announce an increase at all, never mind a $96 one, I don't want everyone to realize that we did not have this huge increase from the Rollway Valley, and if we did not have to do the emergency appropriation for the roof, we would be looking at just a $31 increase per home assessed at $100,000, which is much more manageable increase. Also, if we separate sewer out of the tax bill, like many of our neighboring communities do, the tax increase would be $51 per home. As you can see, separating the sewer bill is basically a trick to make taxpayers appear lower, and it would not recommend, as the taxpayers would not be able to write it off if it were not included in the tax bill. Again, although I do not like to announce a $96 increase, it really should be looked at for the full story rather than a simple snapshot. That's all from my report.
Thank you, Councilman. Oh, before we proceed to the budget, I'd like to make an opening statement. I had our financial officer look at some history. In the budget year 2013, we used 96.6% of the budget. In 2014, we used 97% of the budget. So I believe that we have a good track record, and hopefully we'll continue that this year.
Where do you guys want to start from here? You want to start with questions? I think that everyone should really start with questions for the auditors now that they're here. If everyone wants to really talk about surplus, so that the next meeting we'll be talking about capital item budgets.
Well, maybe before we have questions, do you guys want to say anything and make any additional comment?
No, I mean, I'll just, this report. Just tell me what we started.
The borough started the year out with $734,000 in surplus, and ended the year with $864,000.
And we're,
You did very well in 2014. So we are using a little bit more in this budget, but I think you're at the upper limit. One, just by what you'll be able to generate back this year, and two, with the bond sale coming up.
sure.
I'm just a little concerned with the rating company. In other words, you don't want to use all of it. So we're leaving what we had last year, exactly what we're leaving this year, left for future budgets. That's all I really want to say.
Sam, anything you add to that? Or?
No, I concur that I wouldn't recommend using any more, especially with the upcoming bond sale.
Would you like to speak to the cap bank at all at this point, early in the meeting? Or ask the council if there's any questions? I know, I feel comfortable voting for the cap bank, but if anybody has questions about that ordinance, this is probably the time rather than when it's up for introduction.
I'm always comfortable voting for the cap bank. I understand, why we need it.
Me too.
I mean, you're below the spending cap, so you're okay. Whatever, we're only at the 1.5% this year, so whatever, we can go to 3.5 with the index rate ordinance, and that'll be banked for future budgets. But you're at this point in time, the budget's at the 1.5% of the bank, you're not going to the 3.5, because we're using the bank for the prior year. So whatever you bank this year, will be used in the forward years.
Right, and just for the benefit of the public, banking doesn't mean that money is actually being set aside. There's no
It's
increase
just capacity.
because you're doing
It's
a
just
cap
capacity.
bank. It's really a safety net, so,
It's just capacity.
thank you.
Sure, I've voted against the cap bank in the past, all right? The other night, I guess it was Tuesday night, point was made about why it makes sense based upon the conference, I'll call it seminar, that Councilman Matthew, Councilman Kuzisco, and the mayor went to. I'm a little more understanding of it. I still think it's a game, but I understand it. Councilman Matthew, I was curious, any thoughts, because you and I know voted against it in the past, any thoughts after going to Saturday's conference about what they said, if it makes sense or not?
Couple things, thanks for asking the question. I do tend to think that in some instances it can be a game, and it's a gimmick. You gotta remember, Saturday's seminar, that's, in my opinion, was very government-centric. It didn't look at it from the taxpayer's point of view, it looked at it from the government's point of view. And we were talking to government administrators and an elected official, so that's understandable. But what I try to do is I try to look at it from the people out there who elect me. So that's one thing. The thing was, last year, I actually voted for it by default, and I understood the need for it a little bit more last year. If you have some of the spending, a little bit of a cap bank in there, I don't find a need to increase it. And I just hate getting lulled into this thing of, oh, we'll just increase it because, oh, we're not gonna use it. And that's the thing that, and again, from where you're sitting, from where the auditor is, and from where Sandy's sitting, we had a long conversation about this. It makes sense, it totally makes sense, you're doing your job. But you gotta remember, we're policymakers over here. As a policy, I do not support it in general. If we do have money from the cap, do we have money from the cap bank from last year's increase?
Yes.
Okay, then I would be more comfortable and more likely actually to vote against it this year. Thanks for that question.
I just have a follow-up with that, just to think, because essentially, since it's over a span of 2 years, if you were to vote against it 2 years, then it's lost, and you can get yourself in a really bad bind where you're up against the wall and can't pass a budget. In theory, if you passed it every other year, would that really work, or not so much?
No, well, here, I'll just give you an example this year. When I'm calculating the spending cap, and that's what we're talking about, in 1997, there was a bank from the prior year, 132,000 approximately, so I'm throwing that into the calculation. Now, if you go to the, so that means we're below the cap about $140,000. So if you don't bank that for next year, the 132 I'm using this year, you won't have the
Right.
140 to use for next year.
and
So in
then-
other words, then you're back, you gotta cut something for $132,000 then. Because
Right.
we're not, it won't exist.
Right.
This year, we're using the prior year pieces now, so if there's nothing going forward, there's, when I come to next year's budget, I'm putting in 132, next year I won't be able to put anything in,
Right,
depending on what the index rate is. Last year was very difficult because it was like 0.05%, so the increase was
right, and,
next to nothing. Now we're up one, well, it's still 1.5, which is
So I
really,
just want to follow up on something. Does it have to be a cut, or can it be a referendum?
well, you can do a referendum. You can always do a referendum. to
You see
increase
that,
the cap.
and there you go, thanks, Councilman Yurcheck, for bringing that up.
You can always
That-
do a referendum.
That's the thing right there, is that's the other thing, I forgot to mention it, is that we can always go to the people for it. So that's the other thing, and again, I want.
I said, but that's always an option.
That's a policy preference from my point of view. I would rather have my voters have more of a say on the budget than not. So that's the other thing, is that if we do go to a referendum, that is one way to achieve the cap, and you go ahead and you put it before the voters and see what they have to say on it. So that's,
I believe there's costs involved with that.
and there's always costs in that, but you know what? Cost to get the citizens' consent on something is a cost that I'm more willing to
But you can bank it at no cost, so you have to really.
Right.
Yeah.
consider the cost.
And-
But I'm just more concerned with people's, again, I'm looking at it from a policy point of view, looking at it from a financial point of view, from what you're saying makes total sense. But again, you gotta remember, looking at it as an elected official, it's a different animal.
I understand what you're saying, but, and I definitely agree that this whole idea of a cap bank, if I was sitting in the audience and never sat up here, it's a bizarre concept, but it's the framework the government sometimes has to work within, and that's why it's important to hear what, people that do this for a living have to say about it, also think about how we are, and, you know, I respect your opinion too, as it is what it is, so. Glad we talked about it now and rather than introduction, but I would rather just have it in place for good planning sense and not have our backs against the wall every other year. This doesn't make sense.
Warren, is there a precedent on either side of this argument that you can think of in New Jersey, either having, well, let me frame it differently. I mean, if we abandon the cap this year, and we did not, go ahead. Is there a town you can think of that sort of had its back against the wall with this, or?
No, because everybody just routinely passes it. I mean,
Okay.
matter of fact, this is probably one of the few municipalities I've ever seen voted down in
Really?
all the years. But yeah, everybody just, it's just a routine type of thing, because you're really not, it's only authorizing capacity. I mean, like, if you go to the index rate this year, you'll bank for next year $119,000. That's the difference between the 1.5 and the 3.5. I'm putting in 132, so next year, that 132 is gonna become 119. So, in other words, so you're still under, but I'm saying you won't have that. You take the 119 away, it'll be nothing to put in the bank, so you won't have it next year, if you in fact need it. Unless everything stays flat, which is hard to predict, that's all. It's a planning tool. I mean, do you have the capacity to increase your appropriation? That's all it is.
Sure, I guess the distinction I'm drawing in my mind is surplus versus cap bank, where surplus maybe would be used more for emergency kinds of things, and a cap would be maybe used for more routine things that did not routine, but things that didn't, I'm not exactly sure how I want to.
You know, surplus, the cap here is to increase your spending side of the appropriation, which we're talking about, the 1977 cap. The surplus is just to control your taxes and cash flow, so the two are mutually exclusive.
And you could, we've discussed in the past, it gives you the ability to increase your appropriations, even if you have an offsetting revenue, the tax impact could be zero. But if you don't have the flexibility to increase your appropriations with all the development going on, you may not be able to do the things you want to do. So that's the value of having it in your bank if you need to draw upon it. It doesn't automatically mean you're going to use it or increase taxes as a, you know, a byproduct of it. It's just available if you needed it.
Okay, thanks.
Questions? Want to just open it up? Any, not open to the
Councilman, you mentioned a few items in your opening statement. Did you want to reiterate on some of those, like the shade tree?
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, as far as the shade tree, we did increase that by $6,000 this year to try to catch up on the work that we are behind. You know, if council feels that that number should be reduced back to what it was last year, which was $18,000, we increased it by $6,000. We're just trying to catch up because we have a lot of residents waiting. We have a lot of issues with trees in town. I don't know how everyone else feels about it. That's why we're opening it up.
I just want to remind council that we don't have a bucket truck, and the DPW can do no tree work, and I've not been able to. That's contributory to the backup, because they used to do the small work. It's been a good year or so that hasn't happened. So you need to figure out how you're going to fix that.
Wasn't there also an issue of the time? They feel like they don't have the time
They do
available?
complain about that they don't have enough time for it, but I still was able to make them do the small work. Over the last 5 years, it's become less and less, but I'm still getting work out of them. I'm still getting some work out of them. Even now, if I have a limb hanging, I have to call the contractor. Where they used to be able to do those kinds of things at very least.
Right. Was that on the I don't believe that was on the DPW.
Yes, it is.
Um,
Capital?
In the past it was, but
The bucket truck?
the bucket,
Yeah, I think it is.
you,
It's in the capital?
Yeah.
honestly, it's not.
It's not on his.
It's not on his capital
No.
request. And,
Is he anticipating getting a different source?
well, I know they've shared in the past, but at the same time, I don't think you can share on the spot just for tree work if
I
it's
understood there was something with the Army.
No, that's not happening.
That's not, okay.
army
But,
surplus.
I mean, you know, the county or a neighboring town sometimes will come and help us in a pinch, but,
Can't really call them if there's a limb hanging
and
possibly, you know.
then, you know, the contractor, it's easy to call him, but it's expensive.
Mhm.
It's easy, but it's expensive.
Right.
Comes right away and take care of it, but it's expensive.
But in terms of operating, we shouldn't be discussing the bucket truck in terms of operating. The bucket truck should be capital, it should be in capital. For the past 2 years, I thought it was in capital, so why isn't it
I don't know,
now?
she said she hasn't,
Yeah, no,
It's
no, I know,
right here.
she's saying it's not. I'm
The
saying-
DPW superintendent produces this and it's not in there, so.
Yeah.
It wasn't up, even
Right,
in
well,
a
what was
discussion.
on there, I guess, you know, to get off topic, but as far as capital, he was looking for the sewer jet. You know, that was one of his items.
Yeah, but, you know, we've discussed, I think Jim was talking about it last time with RVSA, you know, about the whole planet. I hate to use that word, but, you know, he's not supposed to give us a 1-year capital, he's supposed to give us at
He
least in
did.
3. So in 3 years,
Mhm.
it's not, in the 3 years, it's not in there?
No,
It, all right, with all,
it's not in there.
all right, it needs to be put in there. And in capital, we need to either account for that through the money that's in there or through bonding, you know, down the road. And I guess, I don't know the exact cost, but, we shouldn't go any further. We should find out the exact cost and see which way it makes sense to go. But that is an item that is needed.
Right. Well, let's,
Just keep, excuse me, just keep in mind that, you know, 3 years, that's what's statutorily required for towns of a certain size, right? Don't we have to do a 3-year capital expenditure projection for
Yes,
towns
yeah,
on
yeah,
under a
every year,
certain
it's part of,
size?
it's part of the.
And it's like 6 years for towns over a certain number size. So that's all that's statutorily required, but from a planning point of view, I mean, you know, again, from that, where we went to that seminar, these guys are planning, you know, decades out.
Yeah.
I would think, you know, but I do recall people not really being in favor of the bucket truck last time I spoke. Feelings may have changed, and I was definitely kind of on the fence about it, but I remember past conversations. The council has changed since then, but there was a lot of skepticism about the bucket truck.
well, I would just interject that it's a very expensive item to buy, and if you don't have the staff that can, you know, you have to, if you really wanna get into your own tree work, you need to be certified, somebody needs to be certified to cut the trees. And if the staff doesn't have time, and you're gonna spend $100,000 on a truck that you really are not able to use, that's not really, you know, the whole tree
it's
thing.
balancing, I think.
You know, the whole tree thing, the best thing that would have happen would be a shared service with another agency that would service us.
And I will be honest, I've called Cranford, I've called a couple other communities, I've talked to the county, they won't help us. They
I've
are,
met with Cranford, I've met
Right.
with Roselle, I've
Right.
met with Roselle Park, no one wants
Right.
to, no one cares about our trees. The county, I begged them on my hands and knees, and
right,
Well,
we've
didn't the
tried that
county-
avenue.
Well, didn't the county also cut back on that one department?
Yes.
They did a
Shade
few
tree.
years ago.
yeah,
Pretty
but
drastic,
on their end,
too.
I don't know.
That's
You see-
right.
But you see, at the risk of being redundant, I guess this was the 5th year I'm bringing this up, if we went ahead and actually bid out garbage collection, as a majority of towns do in Union County, and started to take some of these services in-house, that was another thing from the seminar. These guys in Wharton Borough, they said that they had their DPW guys, they kept their garbage collection in-house, but they said they want their DPW workers to be jacks of all trades. In the mayor's quote, I think was, he said, I don't want somebody standing there with a broom citing the union rule today. He says, I want guys with certifications who could pick up garbage, who could fix this, who could do stuff like that. That's one of the opportunities that we have by kind of looking at this from a strategic level, and saying, hey, if we repurpose and outsource garbage collection, what other things like this can we bring in-house? And I think the clerk, Tina Ariema, brought up, I think he gave a perfect rationale. You're gonna spend that much money on equipment for stuff that you really don't have time for, and maybe you aren't expert in. Either you're gonna go all the way, or just keep contracting it out, but to buy a bucket truck for occasional tree work seems to be probably not a good idea.
And Councilman, to follow up with you, I actually spoke to the mayor of Wharton about that, because when he said that his DPW is jack of all trades, they did it all, I said, how about tree work? He goes, nah, that not so much. Minor tree work, yes, minor tree work, but did they do it all? Absolutely not. They are sending out for it too, so just putting that out there. It's one of those things we definitely have to think about. I was hoping that maybe capital items could be pushed to the next meeting, give us a little more time to focus on this and maybe focus on capital more then, and also give us a little time as a Streets and Roads chairperson. I don't have a problem reaching out to the superintendent and following up with him about the bucket truck. See his thoughts, get, some numbers from him.
That's fine, Councilman, I have no problem with that. The only thing I'll put out is, remember this past year, we couldn't put up the Christmas decorations. We had to go to Fanwood to borrow their bucket truck.
Well, that's because ours was broke.
I know, but it's, I don't know the answer.
Ours ain't broke, it's done.
Yeah, it's done, it's not broke, it's
East
done.
Street.
We
It's
just,
never gonna
very-
be alive again.
we just did a lot of work on that engine last year.
No, it's not working, I don't believe it's being repaired, it's not.
Oh.
All right, so we'll look into that, but I guess all I'm trying to say is, two thoughts. It's the same old story with, is Garwood, and again, I don't know the answer, I'm just putting out the thought. I like shared services too. But, there comes a point, you talk about shared services, we all know, if you share everything after a while, there's no reason for you to exist. And beyond that, it's not just tree work, like that bucket truck, we do other things also. I mean, I know the trees in the house next to me had a big X on them for about a year and a half now. We can't get to it, and so, I'm not advocating getting a bucket truck, but I'm saying we certainly need to talk and figure this out.
Right, maybe there's a reason why he didn't put it on there for the projection. We'll speak to him.
All right. Well, I mean, in terms of budget, we budgeted another $6,000 this year in addition to last year to try to get more work done.
So is the increase for the DPW to do it, or is it if contractors do it also?
It's a contract.
Okay.
It's under shade tree, and that would be with contractors.
Okay.
A little over a year ago, the first time I went out for bid on shade tree work, so I had a 2 or 3 year contract with the vendor, and he has to charge me, a flat rate for everything, but it's expensive, it's really expensive to take down one tree, depending by the size of the tree. Costs a lot of money.
Just so everyone recognizes too, on page 2 of the budget sheet with Shade Tree Commission, that other expenses is up 5,000. The reason why we keep saying 6,000 is because the tree maintenance would actually go up 6, but we were able to scale back tree plantings 1,000, so the net's 5,000. So just so you know.
And I know this year, in terms of, if you guys want to look at other items here, we have $7,500 for street signs for the ordinance that we're going to be, putting forth about, the permit parking. If we don't go through with that, then we don't have to spend that $7,500. But, just to think about things and why we're at these numbers, we went through line by line, so this is just another, $7,500 that you could take out of the budget if you decide not to do that. Not saying that we are, but just laying it all on the table.
Mr. Mayor, last year I spent, I know I took like half the meeting, and I don't want to do that again this year. So I'll just make my statement very upfront. $96 is too much. Not going to support it. I see, looking through this, the vast majority of these items, the majority in every single page is an increase from last year, whether or not that money from the budget last year was expended or not. I mean, I'll pick the planning board because I'm on it. I mean, the planning board budget was $41,000, they spent $7,000. And now the budget increase is $33,000. I'd really like to know why. I'm on the board and I know some of that, but I still don't see why. I mean, if you just look at the budget in terms of what was expended last year versus what's being requested this year, 3/4 of these lines on every single page is an increase, whether they spent that amount of money last year or not. I mean, I'm just, since I'm on the fire liaison too, and I'm not, probably yell at me for picking on it, but I'm just picking on that as looking at it in one of them. The budget in 2014 was 63.6, they spent 58, increase of 62.
Not fire.
Well, as you should, because they didn't spend what they budgeted
Agreed.
anyway.
Agree?
And I'm not picking, I'm saying, I'm looking at every one of them, you know, hey, for me, and, you know, shade trees, you gotta find it's hard to believe it, I'm sorry, I wouldn't increase shade tree, much as it tears at me, okay, it's 96, it's just too much, it's just too much. So, I really would like to, I'm not gonna go through each item. I mean, Warren, maybe, or Sandy, I mean, nobody mentioned the group insurance, okay, obviously it was up, it's up, you know, $41,000. Now, that wasn't even mentioned in terms of, and I say 41,000 in terms of what was actually paid last year. So if we didn't even expend, if we expended $41,000 less than we budgeted, then why are we budgeting the same amount this year?
Well, group insurance is a couple
I know,
of different
yeah.
items. It's health insurance, dental, we do analysis of who's eligible for coverage, and I calculate out to the best of what I can what the employee contribution portion will be. But there's always gray areas. You know, you have to
Understood.
project worst case, you know, if you think someone's getting married, might have a child, or, you know, new hires, we have to try to figure out where they might fall, so.
Good case for them, but expensive for us, obviously. It's just part of how it works.
I understand it, I realize with insurance, I realize it's difficult. And I just picked it only because budget in 2014 was $985,000. What page is that? 4, I think? 3.
You know, I need to say something about
Yeah,
group
go ahead.
insurance. You see a decrease because, and I hate to say this, some retirees passed away in the middle of the year, and we have to pay the whole caveat that we thought we were gonna have to pay. That doesn't mean you're not gonna have to pay it this year.
Understood.
Unless they die. That's all. That's why it's decreased. Just because you see less spent out doesn't mean that you should just cut that line and assume that you should just cut that line. Because there's some, we went through everything and we noticed those things. So while we were doing it, if we did an analysis or whatever we did to come up with that number that's in there, it's because it's in there because it needs to, they're just looking at it one lump sum, there's a reason.
Personally, what I'd like to add to what Council President Neerstead saying, I don't have a problem moving relatively quickly, line by line, with the whole council. It may not be the most popular thing to say, but I'm really okay with that, because I would rather have you ask about the insurance if we have an understanding as to why it is $981,000 right now, we're okay with it. Unfortunate, yes. Are we okay with it? If we are okay, it is what it is, we move on to the next item, we keep discussing. I'm okay with that. And shade tree, it's something that the committee looked at. There was a recommendation here, and what we spent last year, we met smack dab in the middle, 6,000 in between. And then we brought it to the council to see what everybody else wants. Honestly, if everybody else wants to cut that back, I'm okay with that. That's $5,000. You can do it. Less work may get done, but we can do it.
Well,
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, even with the planning board, I mean, I brought up our worksheets, I mean, it's up there because we have professional services for traffic studies, we have education, we have redevelopment of the paper board. You know, we have, you know, legal fees, we have numbers in here that are bringing that up.
What was the first one, professional services, traffic? What was it?
Traffic
That's what
study.
the planning board has requested, they requested a traffic study, and requested funding for a traffic study. And the other reason why a lot of those things aren't paid out, are those are the people that we hired to do the studies.
No, I
We didn't
understand
pay them
that.
yet.
No, I understand that. I understand South Ave, I understand the paperwork, I mean, I sit there, I'm at the meetings. I'm trying to remember, a traffic study?
That's what they requested.
Yes, they did. They want an independent traffic study.
Yeah, and that's valued at $4,500.
Mm-hmm.
Is that $4,000?
But that wouldn't be
I
planning.
believe that was more so the downtown area, right? North and south. Mhm.
They said they wanted, because there's a lot of discussion about traffic in town and parking and all the things that they felt that this was something independent, not from a developer or somebody who's got an application before you.
I'd like to take that back to the planning board, find out, or at least the chair, because, I mean, I'm sitting here, I don't pretend to remember everything, Maria will tell you I don't. But I don't remember traffic study. South Avenue, yes. Paperboard, yes. What else was there?
Those were the two big,
I mean, we have legal
those are two
fees.
big ones.
Yeah, I understand that, yeah.
And we have legal fees, you have redevelopment, both, for paperboard and for Petro. We have education, and we have just other expenses, and then, traffic study.
So I go to every planning board meeting, I don't remember the traffic study either.
I'll tell you, we had the chairman, the vice chair, and the secretary at our budget meeting to discuss this. Basically, their request was substantially lower than last year's, and there were reasons why they wanted to keep, certain monies where it was, obviously, legal fees and certain monies for redevelopment. Education actually had to go up 500 because there were new planning board members, things like that. So they explained it all to us. I mean, this is why it's okay. I mean, we have the time if you want to bring it up with
Yeah.
the chairman.
Sure.
But we're just trying to do
No, I understand.
what the planning board wants in terms of a traffic study, because their feeling was people come before them with their own professional, and when it's your own professional, they may have, a certain view. And so this would maybe help
Well,
them just to understand the full picture.
And budget-wise, that is part of what's going on here in Garwood, so we're not about to start to question them. They're coming in with something that's substantially reduced than last year, so.
Well, but it's substantially reduced from last year because they obviously didn't spend what was projected for last year. But, I mean, I don't want to pick on them, I can start talking about, I do not remember, and I'll be honest with you, I could understand maybe a council. I'm not even sure, traffic's not my specific profession, okay, but I don't even understand how you would do a traffic study. I'm not even sure exactly what it is you would do, a parking analysis? The parking changes that the park committee are proposing are going to change a lot of that parking. And you can, I won't get into what you can use. I think there's ways to get that. I'll talk to the planning board and I'd like to come back with that.
Councilman Petroselli,
Oh.
I think we should take Councilwoman Tedesco initiative, and we should go line by line, because it seems that we're here for 45 minutes, we're all over the
I
place.
agree. Well, just while we're on planning board, so that we don't have to go back to it later.
Fine.
The major difference that you see between what was budgeted and what was spent last year, or seemingly unspent, the vast majority of that is $28,000 from the two redevelopment studies that they were awarded, so that money still needs to get paid out, and it will be charged there. So even though today it doesn't look like they've spent that money, whatever it says they spent last year, add $28,000, that's the true number.
But they were awarded in 2014.
Then they can,
Paperboard was awarded in 2014. Was that money encumbered from 2014?
It's encumbered, yes.
So if it's encumbered, it's not
No,
an
it's not,
expenditure.
it's, I don't know if the staff have an encumbrance voucher for it, because.
Sandy?
No, I don't believe it would have been in here.
So when we awarded the contract, we didn't encumber the funds?
It's a contract, but it's not like she,
Well, hang on, I'll ask Sandy.
Sandy's, yeah, so I would let
You don't-
Tina finish.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I thought you had it.
well, because it's done by resolution of the mayor and council, so
Right, but isn't the money encumbered when a contract?
at times, but in this particular case, it wasn't, but.
It wasn't.
but does that,
That doesn't mean, it's earmarked just for that, so it's not like.
so we will be charging
Look at that.
2014
Yes.
for that money.
Yes, we will.
So
As
it's
soon
not
as-
like,
As soon as they start billing us, and I think Victor did bill us.
that was my understanding.
Right, Sandy? Didn't Victor bill us?
Yeah, saying it, yeah. All right, ask her that. I'm just going by what I'm told.
I'm sorry, only because I do this for a living too. If the money wasn't encumbered, you're saying the money was not encumbered?
I'm not sure, I'll have to check.
All right, because we can't charge 14.
Yes, you
If
can.
it wasn't encumbered from 14.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
Yes, if you place in 14, you can.
Gee, I've been told for the past 12 years that I can't. So how
Well,
come?
If you passed the resolution in 14, it should have been encumbered in 14. So
Exactly.
I don't know what happened, but it should have been encumbered.
Yeah, but we can still
You
charge
can still,
2014.
yeah, you should encumber that. It should have been encumbered the night of the resolution was passed.
And it may have been.
And it may have been, I don't know.
Check on that, but. okay.
All right, so.
Because
this-
that's what the encumbrance system is.
Oh, and I understand that, but, and Warren, I'm sorry, I don't want to get picky here, but if money was not encumbered, if it was not encumbered in 2014, and the bill comes in 2015, you can't use 2014 money if it wasn't encumbered, correct?
Yeah, well, it should have been encumbered. I would-
Right, but that's what I'm saying, so when you
Yeah,
said
but
to
no,
me
no,
that I
no,
could,
you-
no,
You're missing something. An action took place. Council awarded the resolution. It's not like all of a sudden somebody comes in 15 and starts doing it, and it's not there. In other words, the action took place, it should have been incurred.
Right, but the money then doesn't have you put in for 15.
Correct.
That's right.
Correct,
So
and that's why
when,
we
so when
reduced.
we're talking about money having to be spent for redevelopment, the answer is no.
There are,
Coming out of
Those are
14.
just the studies, though, not the plans.
there is some money that they wanted left. For example, redevelopment for Casal Petro on the south side. Last year was budgeted 8,000, this year they're requesting 4,000 for the plan. The mill and paper board was at 20,000 last year. They've asked that to be scaled back to 10,000 for this year to keep going with those plans. They said they need money for the plans, and that's what they told us, so we go by what they tell us, obviously. And so, basically, the new, if you look at the planning board sheet on page 2, where it says paid or charged for 14, it's roughly $7,000. If you add 28, you're at 35. It's closer to what they spent last year, although still a little bit short. But you can still see, even with the addition of the traffic study, their request of other expenses is still down about 8,000 from last year. So.
As well it should be, the two
Agreed.
studies have already been in 14.
Agree?
We could put planning board to bed.
Now I'm talking to Steve.
Councilman, would you start at the beginning, so we go through this quickly, as best we could?
You guys want to just start on page 1, you want to go, right down the line?
As well.
So,
So administrative and executive salary and wage is exactly the same. Other expenses went down. Mayor and council,
if I may just add, administrative executive went down a true 5,000, so we cut that budget 5,000. Although it looks like more on the sheets, that's again because that computerized data was pulled out, so sometimes the numbers might be a little different.
Okay.
Okay.
so mayor and council salary and wage is exactly the same. Other expenses went down. Sorry, thanks, Ann. Municipal clerk,
Sorry, Councilman, I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
interject here, sorry. We've already spent, Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, $1,000 in the other expenses for mayor and council. So that's why, for example, we brought it down only 500 rather than 1,000, in case we need any more, who doesn't want more
Classes,
education.
yeah.
But classes, we wanted to leave some room in there for us to do that. So that's why it didn't get scaled back all the way to 1,000.
Thank you.
No problem. I'm good on that one now.
Thank you, municipal clerk, okay, salary and wage went up by 6,000. Other expenses, only went up by 500. I know that we spent 53, but, that was the request there. Treasurer's department, salary and wage stayed flat. Other expenses, actually went down, about $3,000 or so. Collection of taxes, salary and wage, stayed the same. Other expenses.
Councilman, collection of taxes, we actually cut that to $150. I know it doesn't seem like much, but just so that everybody recognizes, we do cut big to small. So that's an example of a true $250 cut. It looks like more because of the data.
Assessment of taxes, that salary and wage stayed the same. Other expenses is up, not much, maybe, $75 or so. Buildings and grounds, other expenses, is up, from 86,980 to 91,500. Then we have the sports and recreation complex, which is the 19,516.
Councilman?
There's a question on that, yeah. Now, I know what you're saying, that you used to be sprinkled out through other parts of the budget, and I am glad that you pulled it out here as a line item, so I think it is that forward and transparency. Do you have an idea what the increase is? Like what the old number was versus what the new number is?
It's probably about half, oh, sorry.
Is it about half?
I apologize, I thought you were talking about computerized data.
Oh, no.
It's-
No, we're
yeah,
talking about the
it's better.
sports and recreation complex. We had all those other things sprinkled in there, that I had mentioned in the opening statement, such as, pest extermination, fire protection, telephone, electric, water, gas, cleaning services. These were all sprinkled throughout the budget, and that equaled up about half of that.
Mhm. Tina, may I speak to the couple applications we've received as rec liaison?
Yeah.
Thank you. As rec liaison, I'm privy to the applications that have been received, and I won't disclose any names, but we've had more than two interested parties in utilizing the complex. Two organizations are, one is requesting use of the complex that will bring in $6,700. The other requested use will bring in $3,000 if the Recreation Commission approves that. So that's basically $10,000. So we're sitting here in March. If you figure round this number up to $20,000, about half we used to spend anyway, that's 10. Now we're looking at getting a revenue of 10. We're already even on maintenance for this year, projected. Of course, you know, things may change a little bit, you never know. This is our first go at it, first year getting revenue, first year with certain increases to the expenses, but I think that's a positive sign.
Right, and being that it's only March, it's,
Right, and let's stick to that for a second, because Louis, Councilman Petrozelli, you did mention about the revenue. Where's the anticipated revenue from the recreation sports complex indicated in the budget? Or is it zero?
There isn't any.
It isn't?
No,
All right, so maybe I'm asking why not?
Well, because the money that's collected from renting that out, as you remember me saying, has to go into a dedicated fund to, per Green Acres regulations, to operate the facility, provide capital improvements. So as soon as we get that first check, Sandy is going to open up a dedicated account for that. That's what you have to do with that money. For now, we have to fund it in the budget, but probably next year, we'll have built up an account there, and all these expenses will come out of that account. So you won't realize any expenses.
Right, I do remember that conversation. Was it 100%?
Yes.
100%.
Well, yes,
Of
it's,
revenue.
from rental. Yes, from the revenue, from rental.
Right.
Yes. Now, if you get, you know, I mean, can't imagine being any other revenue from there.
Yeah,
Yes. Because the Green Acres regulations, that's what you have to do with the money.
Okay, it makes sense, because you don't want to have a capital project not maintained, and we all know that municipalities aren't very good at, neither is state government, very good at taking money in that's supposed to be used for one thing, and perhaps using it somewhere else, so it makes sense.
yeah, and lest I be a dark cloud on this, all during the debate for the athletic field, what we heard was the volunteers, they're gonna do it, it's not gonna cost the borough anything. We've come to find out that that's really not true, and I never thought it was true. So what my role, I view, is to make sure that we keep them controllable. And bottom line is, massive capital improvements need to be done to that field that exceed whatever pot of revenue we've collected. That's on the borough. I mean, what are we gonna do at that point? Say we have no money, we're gonna let the field just go away? So we've taken on, it's been the opinion of the head of the DPW, it's been my opinion, it's been the opinion of many residents, that we got into something we have no idea where it leads, and that's what I think. I also don't like the idea of government running a business. Yeah, okay, good, we got $6,700 or $9,700. Is that gonna be recurring revenue? Is that gonna come in every single year? Is it gonna increase? We hope so. Do we know that? Have you signed a contract?
Do we know if borrow's coming?
Death and taxes, do we know?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Again, so we're gonna go ahead, increase expenses. This is the government shell game. It's all gonna cost you nothing. Don't worry about it, kids. We got the money here until we don't. So again, I never believed that it was not gonna cost the borough anything. Here, we're starting to see how much it's gonna cost, and we do have revenue coming in to cover it. Now, what's the future gonna hold? Let's just keep toting this up and see how much these operating expenses are, and how much we push off onto our DPW, that's all.
Well, I would say, I think that's why it is important to have it separated out. We are totally okay with showing what it is. This is our projection based on bills that have started coming in. We were told, Councilman Petrozelli, you have the email, maybe not on you tonight, I'm sure on the phone somewhere it is, but basically, we were told that because it would be a new building, it would be more energy efficient, and it would actually be cheaper to run. We're finding right now that that's not the case.
Right.
But how could we predict that if our own professionals are telling us this? They put it in writing. So unfortunately, it is the situation we're in. But, you know, will volunteers be down there maintaining things? I'm told the baseball league will be cutting their grass, dragging their field, lining their field, things like that. So, you know, obviously it's a first year, but I think on the revenue side, it is pretty promising so far that we have two organizations interested, and it's adding up to $10,000.
And if I might, I also was at that meeting, and I just said to the group in general that we're going through a lot of growing pains right now. We have to find out where everything is coming from and being dispersed. So hopefully, you know, we'll go through the first year and really come out ahead of the whole project.
And since I think we're all sitting here, we can see the handwriting on the wall already. I think it's important to indicate that the, you know, volunteers become this dirty word. You know, volunteers maintain the baseball portion of it. The DPW always maintain the rest of it, and DPW will continue to maintain the rest of it. So even though there's money here for cost, I don't really know what that cost will be. And I don't really, to be honest with you, I shouldn't say this, and I'm sure I'll be quoted on it later, but I don't know what cost we will have down there, in all seriousness, that we haven't had before. So it's good that we have money placed in here for anticipated cost, but I'll be very curious to see if we actually do have any.
One other question, where's the money for the custodial contract coming from? Does that come from the buildings and grounds budget?
No, I have it in here, in that.
Complex line, right?
That's in the complex line?
Yeah.
Okay, and, all right, so,
Yeah.
all right,
I had it estimated, obviously.
Yeah, I don't want to discuss that any further. Okay, thank you for answering that.
I have a couple comments on buildings and grounds. The line above it, above the complex line. The buildings and grounds budget, as you can see, exceeded last year's level. They actually came to us, as Councilman Petrozelli pointed out, requesting a $100,000 increase. We scaled that back as much as possible, but again, with $12,000 for a new heating system, it makes it difficult to move it back too much. Also, our old dump truck went down this year. It's our 1996 dump truck that we have, and it cost almost $4,000 to repair. So, you know, it's a costly operation. So we try to scale that back as much as possible.
Yeah, well, you know, we don't want to go back too far on that because, again, being that it is our DPW and, you know, the winters that we've had, those are the reasons why our trucks are getting beat up as much as they are. You know, when she talks about the 97 truck, it needs new front end springs with all of the salt laying in the back. I know that they had a rotten gas line and I think the tank actually ruptured. So there were issues, but it's because of use, not because they're sitting around.
I have a question. The $19,000 that you said is here for the rec complex, you said about half of that was already in the budget,
Already
just
sprinkled.